whatever brain part of your brain that you have to use the most is what develops the most. And so kids with a lot of trauma are going to be developing that area, whereas the fight, flight, or freeze area, which then means there's other developed or brain parts that are not as developed. And unfortunately, that ends up being your cognitive learning or your social, emotional, or your thinking and reasoning. Well, by the time you become a teenager, you're making these rash decisions, or it's catching up to you, or you're not socially as mature. That's where you're going to see some of the issues where you're behind.
Welcome to Miracles from the Hill podcast, where we share raw stories that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe. And of course, you can like, comment, and leave a review. To connect with us, visit our website linked in the description box. And now, here is our host, Ryan Dirk.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to Season 3 of the Miracles from the Hill podcast. This season, we're diving into a very important reality that is children's experience with homelessness. If you're new to the podcast, welcome, buckle up. I hope you have fun. If you're coming back, thanks for continuing to come back. As always, please hit all the buttons, leave us a comment, shoot us an email, tell us what we can do to make this podcast more effective for you, the listener. Man, we are excited that today we have Kelly Leach joining us. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning.
So Kelly is going to be talking specifically about teens, education, things of that nature as they relate to foster care. And Kelly is a Miracle Hill employee in our foster care department for 4.5 years. She's a wife and a mom, and we'll let her tell us a little bit more about herself, but thank you for carving out some time this morning to chat with us.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Appreciate it.
So tell us about Kelly. What's life like?
Me. It's an adventure for sure. I am a wife to Steve, and together we have a blended family of 6 kids, so ranging in age from almost 15 to almost 25. And we are expecting our first grandbaby in the next few days, so we're excited about that. Life is busy for us, and like I said, quite an adventure. My husband is a long-distance swimmer, so we have lots of exciting things that happen with his plans there.
Yeah, and so for our listeners, when she says long distance, what she should say is long distance. 20, 30, 40 miles at a clip, like legitimate, ridiculous, maybe insane distances of swimming.
He has quite the talent.
We could do a whole podcast with Steve just on swimming.
We could.
Okay, so what did the Lord do to bring you to Miracle Hill?
Wow, it was great. We had just moved here, and I was looking for a job, knew I wanted to be a part of a ministry, and just kept seeking Miracle Hill's website to see what was available. And sure enough, they had just posted a job called Independent Living Skills Coach, and that was going to be for the boys' shelter. And you needed an education background, which is what I had. I was a Clemson grad with education was my degree, and so jumped right in, and it was just such a blessing to be a part of that role. Certainly very eye-opening to be in the foster care role, and kind of, I'll tell you a little bit about it, because I had been a mom all this time, but not a mom to 15 teenage boys at one time. And that's kind of what I got to be working at the boys' shelter, because my role was a lot similar to what a parent role is in the home. And so I was getting the kids enrolled in school, and I was at all their school meetings, and any behavior issues at school would, work towards that. So meeting the teachers and building relationships with those that were also building relationships with the kids. And it was just a really blessed time to, get to work in shout out to Wade Hampton School. They just had a wonderful staff, and many of them volunteered at the boys' shelter, and so really got involved in the kids' lives. And so it was just neat relationship building there. And so that is one big piece of the role that I had at the boys' shelter, and then teaching them independent living skills. So anything that you probably would assume is kind of happening naturally in a parental role at home, but wasn't going to be happening with these kids because they're not in a home. And so we were able to kind of move them towards independence with teaching them how to do laundry and cooking and some of the basic things, but just anything to get them ready to be on their own.
So what was your goal with your role? What was the ultimate thing you were trying to achieve with the boys?
Well, the ultimate was for them to hear the gospel message.
Amen.
And for them to realize how much they were loved. Because, to be honest, by the time teens are in foster care, it's a pretty high percentage that they've been in foster care for a while or in and out. And so, life's been difficult for them, and they are not necessarily getting the message that they're worthy and that they're cared for and loved. And so, that's what we really wanted to accomplish, number one, bottom line. But then it's, just catching them up on even things like social skills that they might be behind in, and, how to live independently. Strange enough, though, many of them were very, very independent because they were having to take care of their families. Some had some pretty unique background experiences.
So then, because of legal changes, which we talked about on other episodes, we transitioned the boys' shelter and put all our eggs in the foster care basket. Yeah. And then you take this skill set and take it specifically to foster care. What does that look like? Right.
So my role now is basically to support the families that have teenagers. And I am a lot of the time behind the scenes, and coming in and supporting our care coordinators who are assigned to each family. For those that maybe are listening and wouldn't know how we kind of have our system or our foster care set up, when a child comes into care through DSS, they have a DSS caseworker. And so they're assigned to that child throughout the whole time they're in care. But then when a child is placed in a Miracle Hill foster home, we assign them a Miracle Hill care coordinator. And that person also follows alongside and even provides more resources. Just a great added resource to what DSS provides, and especially that spiritual component, the prayer, the support for the families. And then I get to come alongside even further as another resource to our families, especially those that have teenagers, and provide even more resources that are available in the community or what have you.
So, for our listeners, there's kind of two reasons why this is important. Number one, the biggest gap or the biggest need in foster care is for homes for teens and sibling groups. Often when people get into foster care, they want babies or small children. And there's this huge number of teens who need a place to go. And that group, as you already pointed out, tends to have more trauma, more experiences, arguably maybe more behavioral issues. They're also older and teens. So finding ways to support the family and support the teen is kind of where we insert you.
Correct.
And that becomes your bread and butter.
Yes.
So what kind of resources are you offering to the teens and or the families that are in care?
Well, one thing that we always start with, and this is partially because it is required for DSS, but or I provide them with these Casey Life Skills Assessments. And it's a long little checklist of things. And the assessment covers things like self-care skills, daily living skills, relationships, money management, transportation, school and work, all these little areas that encompass our lives. And it gives me a really good starting point to know what the kids know and what they lack knowledge in certain areas. And so we can kind of start with there in setting goals for the kids and know what resources to provide. Now, certainly a 13-year-old is not going to probably be very aware of government benefits for an employee or as an employee, or how to, budget. But we're going to start with things like laundry skills and how to have healthy relationships, cooking, some of those basic things. And then as they get older, you bring in driver's ed and different resources to help with finding a job and job shadowing, things like that. And then, of course, as they get even older, they're going to be focusing on budgeting and preparing to live on their own. So how to find an apartment and different things like that. So the resources that we have, we love to connect with, those nonprofits, especially those that are Christian-based, where we can link the kids and the families up to those resources to help them, further skills or build their confidence, support that way.
So I'm curious, not to belabor the point, but what are the headings? What are the main subjects on that Casey assessment tool?
A lot of times kids do not know. It's more as they get older. It's the budgeting thing. Mm-hmm. They haven't had to see good examples of budgeting, and maybe, living in different homes here and there, moving around. That example isn't always consistent. They are often can be driven in a different way. That I've got this and don't want to have extra advice, which is probably typical of any teenager, to be honest. And so, and I think it depends on the kids' personalities as far as what the headaches would be. The kids that are really driven are going to be real accepting of learning new things and taking advantage of the resources in the community that we can provide for them. Others, I think, sometimes might just decide that, hey, as long as somebody else is going to take care of me, I don't have to learn how to do it myself. And that is, my caseworker will always provide this, or I've got, my foster family is going to do this for me. And so it's hard sometimes to instill the motivation, sure. Light the fire.
So the general rule that every foster child is a year or two behind, what does that mean? Why is that the case? And what does that tell us to do?
Yeah, it is a generalization, but it's very, very common to find foster kids can be behind in school. One thing, just because they might have been moved around a lot. I know some of the teens that we've worked with, a real disservice is if they're coming from a school that had, say, 8 classes during the day, and then they move into a school with a block schedule, then they've just lost a complete semester because not everything can transfer. So stuff like that is really difficult. And then certainly just moving around a lot or truancy issues can be a really big deal. And that could be a reason why a child's even in foster care. And so that means they've already missed too much school to, maybe even be promoted to the next grade. So those can just be general issues. But then also just the fact that these kids in foster care, many of them have had chronic trauma. And so that just means it's really, stuff has happened for over a very long period of time. And we've learned, and I imagine Diane really touched on how that all kind of plays out. But my very brief summary is that whatever brain part of your brain that you have to use the most is what develops the most. And so kids with a lot of trauma are going to be developing that area, whereas the fight, flight, or freeze area, which then means there's other developed or brain parts that are not as developed. And unfortunately, that ends up being your cognitive learning or your social, emotional, or your thinking and reasoning. Well, by the time you become a teenager and you're making these rash decisions, or it's catching up to you, or you're not socially as mature, that's where you're going to see some of the issues where you're behind socially and as well as cognitively. So that can really kind of be an issue. I'm trying to think what else I had written down here. I think also just that social emotional learning, when that's a little behind, that's even the whole eye contact thing, or how to have a conversation back and forth, difficulty trusting relationships. And, if you can't trust anybody around you, I mean, that just really is a difficult baseline. And it just heightens your reactions, your fear, your fight or flight response. And then you have a really difficult time being able to concentrate on, say, school. They spend a lot of time worrying about what's next. I remember even thinking kids that I'd worked with, just I can't think about school because I'm worried about what's going to happen when I get home. Is my dad going to be in a good mood or a bad mood? Am I going to get beat? Or, like those kinds of things. And so certainly the last thing they're going to think about is their geometry homework. And
so delays in one area exacerbate the whole system and create delays in other areas.
I think so. I think so much of it is interrelated, for sure. Yeah.
So then they go into foster care, or they're in foster care. What describe for somebody, and you already kind of did this, kind of the structure of support that a family or a teen would receive once they get into foster care through Miracle Hill?
Yeah, so they get placed within a family, and immediately that care coordinator visits, and they're immediately involved and setting goals and working alongside DSS, providing resources for the family, whatever that looks like. And then if it is a teen that's placed, then I get to step in and help support. And really every family situation obviously is different, and so is every teen. And so I don't have a cookie cutter approach. And it's all kind of dependent upon the child and what they want. In fact, just even recently, we had a teenager placed that I actually will get to meet in the next few days. And, she has these goals to head to Harvard. And she was upset with just a short amount of time from being removed from one school to the next because she was afraid her grade point average had dropped. So there's somebody that's going to be a whole different approach than the child that is literally 2 years behind in school and has just been passed year after year because no one wants to mess with them and deal with the lack of educational experience. And so the kid has now learned that school's really just stupid to them and they don't want to do it. So there's a whole different piece that I would have to deal with each family, each child.
So I'm going to generalize here, and then you can respond to it. So generally what I'm hearing you say is that there's a ton of resources available, but teens in foster care may still struggle with basic life skills, developmental issues, because they are in this traumatic situation. They're pulled out of their home. They're somewhere different. And even this young girl you're describing sounds like she's super focused, but she's still experiencing this trauma situation.
Right.
Which just exacerbates the issue, or is there more to it?
I think always. I mean, in general, I've just because I'm an older adult, seen life and has seen that, when trauma just can affect you forever. And unless you work through it and deal with that, I think it will affect all your areas. It will affect, your work life, your home life, your relationships. And so partially why I'm a big proponent for everybody to be hopefully in some therapy sessions and working with a counselor as soon as they can. Yeah, I think that no matter what, the trauma will come back and come out to work with or to come into their life in some way. I had read recently that what would be a baseline behavior for, an average child is often not the case for somebody who's experienced trauma. And that's the kind of thing I've tried to help teachers understand, especially when I was at the boy shelter and involved more in the schools, is that your expectations of kids that may be in the foster care system probably should be adjusted, because we can't expect them to know the things that we would assume a child that's been in a stable home would know, with consistent parenting and involved family members. And so, we have to be able to look at them in a different manner. Even for instance, you can't assume that a kid is going to know how to sit down at the dinner table and mind their manners when they maybe have never done that before. Dinner was, in front of the TV and on their own. And so they don't understand that sort of thing. So that's the kind of stuff.
My kids don't understand it. We do it every day.
Well, that's very true. And you think about that. I mean, that's the thing is I don't want anybody listening to think that there's anything bad or wrong about teenage foster kids. This is the same stuff I'm dealing with my own teenagers. It just can be to varying degrees. And certainly there's an added component with the trauma that's involved. And so you want to be sensitive to that. Realize that, behaviors are usually some kind of cry for a need that a kid has. Well, or an adult, I want to even say that. And, kids aren't in foster care because of something they've done. It's usually something that's been done to them or a circumstance that's happened in their life. And one of the biggest things we can do when we're working with those that have experienced trauma is to look at them and say, what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. Because when you can change your mindset like that, you don't see the behavior, you see the person. And you can come alongside them in a different way, because behaviors are not necessarily that a child is choosing to be naughty or defiant. They just don't know how to handle the stress or the trigger of the trauma that might have just happened.
So we've got trauma. We've got some of these developmental delays. Can you talk about some of the general struggles that teens will have? And they're probably not wholly different, wholly different from any teen.
Right. And that's very true. I mean, I think it would be so hard to be a teenager right now. It's bad enough. Social media is just
crazy.
Well, yeah, I'm not even going to say what I want to think about it, but I think that's really extra difficult for kids. Certainly that screams to them, this is how you should look and this is how you should act. And, I've even experienced foster kids that their families could hardly feed them, but they had the $250 shoes that were so popular. But that is, what their priority was, and they often can get out of whack. And work ethic, I think, is not always how it's been. It was back in the day. There's a lot of entitlement today with our teens, and I saw this a lot when I knew that there had been teenagers that had been in the foster care system and in DSS care for a long time. They kind of got to where they just knew that they would be handed stuff, and then there became a lack of appreciation and a lack of effort to even work towards something because they figured things would get handed. But I don't think that that's really any different than many of our teens that are not in foster care. We want to provide so much for our kids, and we do that a lot. And I mentioned this before, expectations can be really different too. And as far as just what's been taught and what they've seen from their experiences. So yeah, I think that's probably my short list.
Okay, so we you already noted we had Diane on. She probably is the episode before this one, and she talked a lot about trauma in general. But can you be a little more specific about what trauma looks like for teens in foster care?
Yeah, I think that one thing that I would tell you is that you may see a lot of it may look like lack of confidence or just kind of giving up. And I think part of it is just the messages that kids have heard or have assumed from what they've seen. And so if they've grown up thinking, I'm not wanted, I can't amount up to anything, I'm a terrible student, like they start living up to that expectation that they think they've heard. I think also that I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. I do want to say this too. Chronological age for foster kids does not necessarily mean that's their developmental level. Mm-hmm. So that is a huge issue when it comes to like kids in school. And they don't see, teachers cannot always, like kind of grasp that whole idea. And so then the expectation is different. They think that maybe kids are being naughty. And I had mentioned this too, mm-hmm. where it's really, they might be triggered. I had a young man, this was very interesting to watch play out. He had a teacher that was extremely involved, and she went way above and out of her way to provide him with a safe classroom. And he could not understand what it meant, or maybe it was more, he couldn't accept that people were caring for him. He was so surrounded by love, by the staff at Miracle Hill, mm-hmm. by this teacher, that when it got so overwhelming for him that he would just get up and leave the classroom. Well, then behaviorally he would get suspended because he would walk out of the room. And when we finally got down to it, he just said, I don't know how to handle people taking care of me and loving me like this. And that's when we were like, oh, the light bulb went on. And so that is kind of like a prime example of like the triggers and that kind of thing, where a kid in school cannot always understand that being cared for situation, or they have a difficult time with authority. And that is because they don't know how to trust people. They haven't had anybody in their lives that they can trust consistently. And so when they go to school, it just looks like, well, there's another person telling me what to do in the teacher or the principal. Or it's another person like my caseworker who's always telling me what to do. They don't understand that we're doing these things out of love. But they just see that it's a lack of control for them. And that's a big thing for foster kids.
So I'm going to go off script for a minute. So there's this great book written by Tom Brokaw. Okay, it's called The Greatest Generation.
Oh, yeah.
And in it, he tells stories about these people that are born in the Depression, fight in World War II, have a life defined by trauma, and then pick themselves up by their bootstraps, to use the terminology, and have these super stable lives, of grit.
Yeah.
What is different today? right? Like, why was that the general response to trauma for that generation? And today, at least it appears to be so different.
I don't know the answer. And I had even written something like that down in my notes is I don't understand, like, where do we miss the boat when it comes to the motivation and the, because I feel like we're pouring in these positive messages of you're worthy, you're smart, you do not have to be the product of your environment. You're so much different, this doesn't define you, all those things. And then I think, what is it? Because I wish I had the answer.
I mean, it was almost that generation received the opposite message.
Yeah.
Right? Like that generation was, you can't,
right.
but you'll do it or die.
Right. And now I will say, I don't want to speak in generalizations because we have had some amazing circumstances over the last couple of years with the families that we have had, teens that have graduated from high school.
Yeah.
And that isn't always the case. And we can talk about this in a little bit too, but when a foster child turns 18, they have the right, now that they're an adult,
to do
what they want. And yet we've had several that have stayed in their Miracle Hill foster families, and they've had great success. They've gone on to college or are working. And so, you think, okay, I would almost say that some of their motivation is that they've got this safety net, this protection, this security. They're in these homes with stability, and they're given some autonomy. They're allowed to feel like they have some control with structure, with protection. And, I think that there's that motivation. So maybe there's a little bit more grit. I mean, and that could be part of this where they're just saying, I have that support that they didn't have before, but I do not have the answer to that. I wish I knew the magic key to motivation or...
So I'm sure that I've said this on this podcast at some time or another, but I think that humans were a lot like dogs in that when we get hurt, we snap at the hands that are trying to help us, right? And when we're going to die, we try to go off and isolate. And you watch these videos of these hurt and damaged dogs that go to the shelter, and the shelter worker will just go sit with the dog, right? Like for long periods of time, and teach the dog that they're there because they love them, right? Not that they're expecting anything from them. They're not scared of their anger or their fear. And so those kids who accept the support or accept the love, right? That is done through intentional relationship over time.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's use that as a springboard to get to this idea of healthy modeling. Why is that important for not just for the foster parents, but for everybody who's interacting with these children, and what is it?
Well, I think, just even like what you were talking about, we always add in that being present is incredibly important, and that's what we want our foster families to know and do and be. And I can even just, Brenda and I were talking yesterday. She's the vice president of Children's Ministries, and we were just looking kind of at the overall picture and thinking how unique it is that I said, we have 3 single women that have been the most incredible, pivotal people to foster most of our teens that we've had over the last few years. And that we just said, wow, what a testimony to just what you were saying about like the hurt dogs that are in the shelter where somebody is just there. And we said, these teenagers in those homes have had great success. And please, I'm not minimizing any teen that's in a family with 2 parents. But in this situation, these teens have really gotten individualized attention, and they have been able, I think, to just build trust quicker, and, learn to, strive for that next thing. And so, shout out to anyone who thinks that they can't be a foster parent if they're not married. That is absolutely not true. And we're seeing great success with single parent foster parents. So please out there consider shameless plug for that. Shameless plug, because we always are looking for families. I think that for sure stability is huge, and the consistency, and that means coming back to the kids and not shaming them for a poor mistake or a poor choice, and modeling what it's like to be in a faithful relationship, modeling what it's like to be a good steward of your resources, whether that's time or money. Certainly, sharing why we go to church. Why is that important? What does faith really look like played out in my life? And how am I demonstrating that? How am I growing closer to the Lord? I think all of these things are important ways to model. Sitting the kids down and saying, this is why I make this choice. This is why we spend our money this way. Consistency is huge. I think I've already said that. And just really seeing the children, the youth, for who they are, not for their circumstances.
I have young children, and it is super clear to me that kids are always listening and always paying attention, right? Like,
yeah.
When you think they're not, they are.
Yeah, they'll call you on it.
They pick up everything. And while my wife and I do a fair amount of correcting, we try to do a lot more encouraging or reaffirming positive behaviors.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is much more of a contributor to who my kids are becoming than the no's.
Absolutely.
Right? The yeses. Just yesterday, I got home and my son, my 7-year-old, said to me, Dad, I put something by your sink. So I went in the bathroom, and he had put a Tootsie Pop by my sink. And I went and found him, and I stopped him outside, and we had a long talk about that, just reaffirming how important that is, what he did, and how grateful I was for what he did. Huge to model those behaviors and then reaffirm them that when we see them. So let's talk about one of the hardest points in foster care, which is the 18th birthday.
Yes.
So when someone turns 18 and they're in foster care, that becomes of a diverging road.
Yes.
All right. So what happens when they turn 18?
So I'm going to back up just a little bit,
Okay.
just so you can understand a little bit of the system. But so DSS will have a meeting with the kids once they turn, I think it's usually right around 17 and a half, by 17 and a half. And they call these the transitional planning meetings. And so that is literally taking each area of your life, breaking it down, and what are your goals? Where are you headed? I personally wish that they were talking about this a lot before 17 and a half, because then they have the next meeting at 18, and then the kids, can be on their own.
Because you're talking about it with your kids when they're
right,
getting
all
into
along.
high school.
Exactly.
Right? What do you want to do?
Exactly. And how are you going to get there? Because now we're talking at 17 and a half. Well, are you driving? Well, do you want a vehicle? What do you want that to look like? And to be honest, it's not like you just snap your finger and you go, all of a sudden I have enough money for a vehicle, So it's just really helping them to think outside the next few months and what their plan is going to be. So I do get to sit in on those meetings, as well as our Miracle Hill Care Coordinator. And so it's great, because then I can hear firsthand, this is what I want to do. I'm planning to go live on my own. All right, then we know we've got to zero in on budgeting and being realistic about how much money's coming in and where's it going to go and how are you going to save enough for this and that. There are great resources out there that are going to help kids. but they still have to be able to live past that. It's like, we can help you get an apartment, but you got to be able to pay for it. We can help you get a car, but now you got to be able to pay for it. And so you don't want to set up something unrealistic. And that can be hard for any teenager, just to kind of be like, this is the reality. But once they turn 18, they do have options. And so they can, we had said this before, once they turn 18, they're an adult, they can make their own decisions. So they can literally check out of DSS care and walk away from that.
On their 18th birthday.
Yes.
Peace out.
Done.
Gone.
Done. What we really work to encourage them is to at the very least, keep your aftercare worker. You get assigned, your DSS caseworker is no longer your caseworker. You get an aftercare worker who will stay with you until you're 26. Actually, I think it's 21, but you can still receive Medicaid through age 26 if you've been in foster care. And so the aftercare worker would be somebody that can be that resource for the child, youth, now adult, I guess is really what we're talking about. And so that we at least, at the very minimum, want them to do that, because there are some really great resources that DSS will provide for youth at 18. And so, but it can be a little challenging to get refunds or get the money up front for some of these programs and things. And so having an aftercare worker to kind of support you and walk alongside you is, at the very minimum, something that we would like to see. Then kids at 18 can also, they have the choice to stay in DSS care, in the sense that DSS will provide housing for them. So that could mean that they would stay with their Miracle Hill foster family, which we absolutely love, even if they're heading off to college. Right. At least they have that support system to come right back to. Or they could go into a semi-independent living program, a group home for, those that are older. There are parameters, rules, but there's going to be rules if you stay in your Miracle Hill foster family too. And that can be difficult sometimes. I think, I watched a lot of teenagers in foster care that just feel like, I've been controlled by rules all this time, and not understanding that rules are to keep you safe. And so they're just like, I'm out of here. I want to do everything on my own and make my own decisions. And, don't understand that the structure is actually really great for them.
So what are the percentages, Kelly? Like, what percentage go out on their own? What percentage stay in care? What percentage go off to college on their own? How many go to the military?
I don't have that fact. But of those that we've worked with that have reached the age of 18 over the last few years, I would say the majority of them ended up staying in their Miracle Hill foster family.
Praise the Lord.
I think that is a huge, huge testament to our amazing families, and I get choked up thinking about it, because I cannot thank these families enough for their role and how they have really created a safe and loving home for these teenagers to stay in. Now, when I was at the boys' shelter, it was a very different mindset. And kids, I think because they were just so used to feeling like they were one in a number, they were just like, I'm out. I'm not going to be in an institutionalized sort of setting anymore. And so it's a real testament to the foster homes that we have, and, the families that are raising these kids with Christian values, and the support that they're able to give. It is definitely not easy, but it's making a humongous impact on these teenagers. So I'm going to ask
another question, another statistical question you may not know the answer to. So by the time a child becomes a teenager, I'm guessing that the percentage of them that even are pursuing reunification is much smaller, and there's more of them where their parents' rights have been terminated. Is that true?
I would make that assumption as well. And that, in fact, we've even had some that we've worked with that had the option to be adopted, and they just said, I'm so close to becoming an adult. I'm okay, just, like I'll stay in this family as your, as your family, but not make that official. So I think that, sometimes they're just ready to just kind of do it on their own. I do want to say, you had asked about college and stuff. In my experience, what I've seen is schooling can be really difficult. It's been enough to get these teens through high school and doing well. And without the support of somebody really coming alongside them, college can be a struggle, especially if they're living away. I mean, an 18-year-old that's grown up in a secure and, consistent home with very strong morals still it's just hard being very independent. And so I feel like the kids that seem to have really done extra well have been at home, living and going to school, going to Greenville Tech. In fact, I have to brag. We had a young gal that she just recently turned 19, and as of the last couple of weeks, she's gone out on her own, but she lived with her Miracle Hill foster family up to this point. And she is the first in her family to have ever gone to college. And she got her associate's degree in cosmetology. And I thought, the pride in her face, and of course we were so proud for her, and I think, what a huge deal to say, I've come out of this adversity. I've been in and out of foster care all my life, and now I'm the first to have gone through college. And I, would say that is because she learned to build trusting relationships, and she was in a home that could really encourage her to keep going to class, keep doing what she needed to do to get to her goals.
So if a child checks themselves out and they still maintain a relationship with, what was the name of that person, the exit?
Aftercare worker.
Aftercare worker.
Yeah.
All right, so there's one kid. On another one, the teen decides to stay in foster care. Both groups still have resources available to them from DSS. Yeah. Is there a difference in those resources, or is the difference the stability of the foster home?
The difference is the stability.
So they have the same access to help with all different types of things, housing, education, things like that. Right. But the difference is the family stability. Right.
You can have, and I will say, just for note for the listeners, even if a child chooses, or I keep saying child, they're an adult at 18, even if they choose to no longer be under DSS care, they have until age 21 to also sign back in. And we have seen that before.
Sign back in.
Yes.
Wow.
And that is newer. And so that's really great, because we don't want them to get out there and fail and stay failing. If they get out there and realize, this is way too much for me, I need some support, they can always come back into DSS care and, get that extra support. So I find that has been a really great change. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of the supports. I mentioned they get Medicaid currently, and they can have that until they're 26 years old. So that's super cool. But DSS will also help with transportation costs. So they'll pay some months of your car insurance through South Carolina Foster Parent Association. There's a program that will help young adults get cars. DSS, these are called the Chafee ETV funds. Chafee is for when they're older than 18. They'll help them pay for certifications for employment, their interview clothing, the clothes they have to wear for work. $5,000 per year to go to college can be provided.
That's great.
And then they get, usually those that are in foster care can receive all kinds of other governmental grants. So they can really, if they are driven, they can get to college and do without debt. And that's really huge. They'll pay for, rewards for keeping your GPA up. They'll give you a college dorm room bundle. pay for driver's ed. I mean, all kinds of things, housing, rental applications, rental assistance up to 6 months, help with furniture, things like that. Not that we want the kids to depend on that, but it's a nice safety net.
Well, it's what the parents would do.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And so we want to have success, and these are just, added extras that can help support them and get them on their way. So it's very cool.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you 2 last questions. So I'm going to tell you what both questions are, and then we'll take them one at a time. So the first question is, what can people do to support teens in foster care? And the obvious answer is become foster parents for teens. So we'll make that argument on the second one. Why would someone want to become a foster parent for a teen? But what can people do to support this very challenged demographic of kids in foster care?
Number one, pray. Prayer is a huge way that people can, be supportive. I think that, even considering how you can support a current foster family of a teen, with making a meal or giving them a break or anything you can come up with. Mentoring is huge. The more consistent Christian people in these teenagers' lives, I think the better off they'll be when they can see that, it's not just this person, but all of these people in my life live their faith out. And so that's huge. People that are consistent, we want to see them learn how to build trusting relationships and, see lives lived out that glorify God. Obviously, we've talked about just, I can't say that because we have to talk about that one next, being a foster parent. I think, another thing that we would love to challenge people to even consider is allowing a foster teen to job shadow. They may not have had that many experiences in their life and don't know what they want to do next. And for them to have the experience to just for a couple weeks even to see what a particular job may look like, especially in a Christian business that's run with integrity and, based on relationships, that would be huge just to give some experiences for these kids. So that would be something that I would also say, to consider. We have generous donors, and we are so grateful for that when, we're able to help kids get to camps or get to therapies or take music classes or, have some experiences that they haven't had before. So we're very appreciative when, we have donations that come in that can help with braces and, some of these things that these kids have missed out on. And so we are very grateful for, all of the donors that we have.
So I want to hit that job shadowing thing a little bit harder because that I think that could blossom from this podcast into something amazing, right? So, most everybody who's listening has a job. And they probably have never thought, I could bring teenagers in here to do X, right? And almost everybody has the ability to find some part-time hours. If you're in a law firm, somebody can sort papers for you part-time or do a summer internship. And by doing that, you could give somebody exposure to a job that maybe they think that they're not even worthy of,
right? Because
of the traumas in their brain. And you could maybe financially support them for a vehicle by giving them a short-term job while they're in the tail ends of high school. So somebody is listening and they are like, yes, I'm going to come up with these jobs. How do they tell us about them?
You can communicate with me.
Okay.
I mean, anybody here could get you pointed to me, but yeah, and we'll help you, we can give you some training on working with those that have experienced trauma to help you understand
Sure.
it a little bit more, because I would want to say, you can't have the exact same expectations. You're going to have to be patient to work through, because sometimes you may find that if somebody doesn't like the task, they're just going to walk off, and so this is a lot of, it's being present and a lot of a relationship building, as well as, oh, by the way, I'm also going to show you how to do this job and give you exposure. And so, look at it as a dual opportunity to, pour into a kid's life for, even if it's just a couple weeks, but just for them to, have some experience. And I mean, we will definitely do whatever it takes to work alongside and help that employer, have a successful experience.
We'll put your contacts in the show notes so that people can just
Perfect.
email you with their amazing jobs that
Yes,
they're going to
that
come
would be
up
great.
with.
Thank you.
So somebody's listening, they're like, man, the Lord's been telling me to do this and I'm just avoiding it. So make the sales pitch for why somebody would want to be a foster parent specifically for a teen or sibling group. Why is that important?
Because you can make an incredible life difference. Just being in a safe, secure, and loving, consistent home, where you are sharing the love of God and they are hearing the gospel message, changes lives. We know that. We've both experienced that. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that in our kids. We had a teenager baptized this weekend. I mean, praise the Lord. She had not grown up in church. And this was just after just a few months of living in this foster family's home. She really got to see the message hear the message of Jesus Christ. Another family, the same thing. I just heard that they had 2 weeks with these kids, and little girl had never heard of Jesus. And she was singing Bible songs, and she was shouting her out, Jesus loves me. And you think, all right, we take what we can with the short amount of time we have, and we pour into them, and it changes lives. And so if God is calling you or tugging on your heart, he's not doing it for you to ignore. And he's saying somehow he wants you involved in foster care. And maybe it's supporting and wrapping around a current family. But I will say I get the privilege of surprising our foster families a few every month with what we call our You Matter Dash. We definitely want our foster families to know how much they matter. And so just surprise things. Varies each month. But the last month I got to actually talk to several of the families that they happened to be home. They had younger kids. Often both parents are out working. And they said, I had 3 of the 5 families say something along the lines of, if it weren't for Miracle Hill and the support that we receive, I don't think we would be able to continue fostering. We are so grateful. And so I say that because we at Miracle Hill really value those that are choosing to love kids from hard places. And we want to do whatever we can to support the families and come alongside them and meet their needs so that they can meet the needs of the kids and do their very best. And so we just are very appreciative. There's a lot of great training. Everything is very intentional. And I just think that, what an amazing experience to
Amen.
be able to be involved in some life change and watch God do his thing.
It's not easy, but it's good.
It is good.
Thank you for coming on, Kelly.
Thank you for having me.
Would you do us an honor and close us in prayer and pray for maybe those families that are thinking about it, the families that are serving, and the teens that we have the honor of serving each day?
Absolutely. Lord, we just come to you knowing that you do immeasurably more than we can ever ask or imagine. And we've seen that in how you have worked through Miracle Hill. We've seen that in our families, and we've seen that in other areas of our ministry, and we just are so grateful. to you for that. We lift up today the foster families that we have serving you and loving our children from broken homes and hard places. And we just pray for strength and wisdom as they do your work. And Lord, it's hard and it's tiring and they're weary. And so we ask for rest. We ask for those to come around and wrap their arms around the families, providing the needs that they have. And Lord, we just pray for those whose hearts are being stirred right now. You're doing your work, and we know that hearts are broken, knowing that there's so much sin in this world, and as a result, families are broken and yuck happens. And yet, Lord, you can redeem all that. And so we just pray for those that are being stirred to be involved somehow. Provide them with the clarity to know what next steps to take and to not dismiss when you're calling on them. And Lord, we just pray for especially those teenagers that are in foster homes right now. It's tough. It's tough to be a teenager, and it's tough to have some extra baggage. And Lord, we just pray that all of these kids that are in our care know your love, know how much you care for them, that you made them wonderfully and perfectly, and that they can be whatever they want to be, and they can do whatever they want to do, and that they are loved so much by you. And we just thank you for us getting to be the instruments to carry that love, and the families that love them as well, just to be parts of the story. And so we are so excited to see how you are going to move and work through all of foster care in Miracle Hill and the life change that you've already done and will continue to do. So Lord, we lift these things up to you. We praise you for who you are, and we love you so much. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.